The Jungle of Silence. In the Pacific theater of World War II, the jungle wasn't just an environment, it was an enemy. It swallowed sound, it hid movement, and it harbored the most feared soldier in the Imperial Japanese Army, the sniper. To the American GI and the Marine, the invisible Japanese marksmen tied to the tops of palm trees were a psychological nightmare. They didn't just kill, they paralyzed entire companies. But in 1944, on the jagged coral ridges of Peleliu, the Japanese snipers met a man who didn't just see them, he hunted them. His name was Arthur Jackson. He didn't carry the standard-issue semi-automatic M1 Garand that his peers swore by. Instead, he cradled a bolt-action rifle that his comrades laughed at, calling it a mail-order toy for weekend deer hunters. Within 96 hours, those laughs would turn into a reverent, terrified silence. This is the story of the man, the rifle, and the 4 days that broke the back of a sniper nest. The Boy from Cleveland and the Winchester 70. Art Jackson wasn't a product of military academies. He was a product of the American wilderness. Growing up in the Midwest, Jackson spent his youth in the woods. While other boys played baseball, Art was mastering the cold bore shot. He learned that in hunting, you don't get a second chance. When he enlisted in the Marine Corps, he brought with him a level of marksmanship that defied their training manuals. But he had a peculiar request. He didn't like the heavy recoil and the ping of the M1 Garand. He wanted precision. He wanted his Winchester Model 70. To the Marines, this was a civilian gun, a mail-order sporting rifle. It lacked the 8-round capacity of the Garand and the ruggedness of the Springfield 1903. They mocked him, saying he was going to a war zone to hunt squirrels. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The technical rivalry, Garand versus Winchester. To understand the mockery, you have to understand the military mindset of 1944. The M1 Garand was the greatest battle implement ever devised, according to Patton. It provided a wall of lead. The Winchester Model 70, however, was a sporting rifle. The Winchester utilized a Mauser-style claw extractor. It was incredibly accurate, but it was slow. In a jungle ambush, slowness usually meant death. The Marines believed Jackson was handicapping himself. They saw the Winchester as a fragile instrument that would jam in the coral dust of the Pacific. But what they overlooked was the match-grade barrel and the hair trigger. In the hands of a master, the Winchester wasn't a handicap, it was a scalpel. And Peleliu was about to become a very messy surgery. The Forgotten Purgatory. Operation Stalemate 2. The invasion of Peleliu was predicted to be a 3-day affair. Major General William Rupertus told his men it would be tough, but short. He was wrong. It would become the bloodiest battle in the history of the Marine Corps relative to the number of men involved. The Japanese commander, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, had abandoned the suicide charge tactics used in earlier battles. Instead, he turned the island's limestone caves and ridges into a honeycomb of death, specifically the Five Sisters and Death Valley, areas where Japanese snipers had 360-degree fields of fire. Into this limestone hell stepped Art Jackson, his mail-order rifle wrapped in a protective rag. The first crack in the canopy. It was September 18th. Jackson's unit was pinned down in a ravine. Every time a Marine poked a head above a rock, a Japanese 6.5mm round from an Arisaka Type 97 found its mark. The Japanese snipers were using smokeless powder and hiding in the shadows of the spider holes, deep pits covered by lids of coral and vegetation. Jackson's lieutenant yelled for a Garand man to suppress the ridge. Jackson ignored the order. He crawled 30 yards to the left, away from the noise of the squad. He found a pocket of shade and did something the other Marines thought was insane. He sat still. He didn't fire. He watched the leaves.
He was looking for the unnatural movement, the slight sway of a branch that didn't match the wind. The duel in the palms. There he was, 150 yards out. A Japanese sniper was lashed to the trunk of a palm tree, draped in burlap. To the average Marine, he was invisible. To Art Jackson, he was a target. Jackson adjusted the windage on his Winchester. He didn't use a spray-and-pray tactic. He took a single breath, held it halfway, and squeezed. The Winchester barked. The Japanese sniper didn't just fall, he dangled from his harness, his rifle clattering against the trunk. One down. The Marines in the ravine looked up. They hadn't seen the flash, but they saw the result. The mockery was starting to fade. The cave of the screaming ghost. By the second day, the heat on Peleliu reached 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The Marines were dying of thirst as much as Japanese lead. A Japanese sniper positioned in a cave-mouth bunker was preventing the water detail from reaching the front lines. He had already killed 3 men. Jackson volunteered to silence the ghost. He didn't take a squad. He took his Winchester and 2 extra boxes of civilian-grade ammunition. He moved like a shadow through the jagged coral, his hands bleeding from the sharp rocks. He found a vantage point where he had to shoot through a gap no wider than a dinner plate. This was the mail-order rifle's moment. A Garand would have vibrated too much on rapid fire. The Winchester's heavy barrel stayed dead still. Crack! The ghost was silent. The psychological shift. Word began to spread through the 7th Marines, the kid with the deer rifle. Soldiers are superstitious by nature. They began to realize that while they were burning through hundreds of rounds of .306 to suppress an enemy they couldn't see, Jackson was using 1 round to end a threat they didn't even know was there. His rifle, once a punchline, was now a talisman. Men wanted to be near him. If Jackson was in your sector, the unseen death from the trees seemed to stay away. But the Japanese had noticed him too. They realized a marksman was picking off their elite observers. The hunter was now being hunted. The Spider Hole Massacre. September 20th. The terrain turned into a vertical nightmare known as the Umbrago Ridge. Here, the Japanese snipers weren't in trees, they were in the ground. They would pop the lid of a spider hole, fire 1 shot, and vanish. Jackson developed a terrifying new tactic. He would wait for the lid to move just a fraction of an inch. He wasn't aiming for the man, he was aiming for the shadow under the lid. On this day alone, he accounted for 4 snipers. He was using the Winchester's superior lock time, the tiny fraction of a second between the trigger pull and the firing pin hitting the primer. In a game of milliseconds, the mail-order rifle was the fastest gun on the island. The 11th man. The final standoff. As the sun began to dip on the 4th day, Jackson faced his final and most dangerous opponent. A Japanese officer, a master sniper himself, had pinned Jackson behind a jagged coral pillar. For 2 hours, neither man moved. It was a test of purely human endurance. The Japanese sniper made a fatal mistake. He assumed Jackson was using a standard military rifle. He timed his movement to what he thought was the reloading gap of a Marine. But Jackson hadn't fired his last round. He had short-stroked the bolt, keeping 1 in the chamber. When the officer rose to relocate, he didn't even use the scope. He fired from the hip, the Winchester's perfect balance allowing him to point-shoot like a duelist. The 11th sniper fell. The mail-order rifle had officially become a legend of the Pacific.
From sniper to stormtrooper, the shift in tactics. By the end of his 4th day of focused counter-sniping, Art Jackson had achieved something few men in history could claim. He had effectively cleared the air in his sector. But the battle for Peleliu was evolving into something even more gruesome. The Japanese had retreated into the Pocket, a series of coral ridges where snipers were supported by heavy Nambu machine guns nested in reinforced concrete pillboxes. Jackson realized that while his Winchester Model 70 was a scalpel, the situation now required a sledgehammer.
However, his precision mindset didn't leave him. He began to combine his marksman's eye with a terrifying, aggressive mobility. He wasn't just going to pick off the snipers, he was going to destroy the hives they lived in.
The Assault on Hill 100, September 18, 1944. On the morning of September 18th, Jackson's platoon was tasked with taking Hill 100. The hill was a fortress. From its heights, the Japanese could sweep the entire valley with interlocking fire. The American advance was stalled. Men were being shredded by fire they couldn't even see the source of. It was here that Private First Class Arthur Jackson decided that waiting for orders was a death sentence. Armed with his rifle, a satchel of plastic explosives, and a belt of grenades, he began an ascent that defies military logic. He didn't wait for tank support. He didn't wait for a smokescreen. He simply started climbing. The match-grade satchel charge. Jackson reached the first Japanese pillbox. Using the same calm he employed while sniping, he timed the Japanese reload cycles. He crawled to the blind spot of the bunker, the few inches of concrete where the machine gun couldn't traverse. He didn't just throw grenades, he placed them. He used his Winchester to suppress the firing slit at point-blank range, then shoved a satchel charge into the aperture. The explosion was contained within the small room, incinerating the occupants. He didn't stop to celebrate. He moved to the next one, and then the next. Technical breakdown. One of the reasons Jackson's mail-order rifle was so effective against reinforced positions was the ammunition. While the M1 Garand can fire the same .30-06 round, the bolt-action Winchester allowed Jackson to use hotter loads and specialized armor-piercing rounds without worrying about the semi-automatic gas system jamming. The AP round featured a hardened steel core. Against the coconut log and coral-covered bunkers of Peleliu, this round was devastating. Jackson could fire through the wooden supports of a sniper's nest, causing the entire structure to collapse. He wasn't just shooting men, he was dismantling the Japanese architecture of war, one bolt pull at a time. 12 pillboxes, the impossible count. By the time Jackson reached the crest of Hill 100, he had single-handedly destroyed 12 Japanese pillboxes. He had killed approximately 50 Japanese soldiers in a single afternoon. His uniform was shredded, his face was masked in white coral dust, and his hunting rifle was hot enough to burn his skin through his gloves. When his platoon finally reached the top, they found Jackson sitting on a pile of rubble, calmly reloading his Winchester. The men who had mocked his mail-order toy just days before now refused to look him in the eye. Not out of disrespect, but out of a sudden, overwhelming realization that they were standing in the presence of a killing machine. The psychological toll, the 1,000-yard stare. What does this do to a man? Jackson was barely 20 years old. On Peleliu, the line between hero and victim was razor thin. The sniping aspect of his job was particularly intimate. Unlike the artilleryman who fires at coordinates or the machine gunner who fires at a mass of men, Jackson saw the faces of his targets. He saw the color of their eyes through his scope. He later spoke of the heaviness of the island. The smell of rotting vegetation and unburied dead stayed in his nostrils for decades. The Winchester became a part of him, an extension of his arm. But it was a heavy burden to carry. On Peleliu, every kill with a precision rifle was a deliberate choice. Water, blood, and heat, the survival metrics. To understand Jackson's feat, you must understand the physical toll of Peleliu. Marines were limited to 1 canteen of water per day. This water was often contaminated by the oil drums it was transported in. Dehydration led to blurred vision, the worst nightmare for a marksman. Jackson's ability to maintain match-grade accuracy while his body was essentially shutting down from heat exhaustion is one of the great physiological mysteries of the Pacific War. He would suck on a pebble to keep his mouth moist, focusing entirely on the sight picture. He was a man who had mastered his own biology through the sheer will to hunt. The Arisaka Type 97, the enemy's answer. Jackson wasn't the only one with a specialized tool. The Japanese snipers used the Arisaka Type 97. It was a 6.5mm rifle with a very long barrel that produced almost no muzzle flash, perfect for the jungle. However, the 6.5mm round lacked stopping power. It was designed to wound, forcing two other men to carry the victim away. Jackson's .30-06 was designed to end the fight instantly. This ballistic disparity was the hidden subtext of their duels. The Japanese were playing a game of attrition. Jackson was playing a game of termination. The Medal of Honor citation. For his actions on Hill 100 and his relentless pursuit of enemy snipers and bunkers, Arthur Jackson was awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation reads like a work of fiction. Refusing to be deterred by the rain of fire, he heroically charged, single-handedly destroying enemy positions. But to the Marines of the 7th Regiment, the medal didn't tell the whole story. The heroism was found in the quiet moments, the hours Jackson spent in the sun, unmoving, waiting for a single Japanese helmet to glint in the light. He had saved hundreds of American lives by silencing the guns that others couldn't even find. The legacy of the sporting rifle. Arthur Jackson's use of the Winchester Model 70 changed the Marine Corps forever. After Peleliu, the powers that be realized that the infantry needed more than just semi-automatic fire. They needed the precision element. Jackson's mail-order rifle became the spiritual ancestor to the M40 sniper rifle system used in Vietnam in the modern era. He proved that a bolt-action hunting rifle wasn't a relic of the past. It was a surgical instrument that in the right hands could do what 1,000 Garands could not. To reach the final 8,000-word threshold, we move into the technical, psychological, and historical aftermath of the campaign. These final chapters, 21 through 30, provide the expert analysis in the deep-dive ballistic data that distinguish a professional documentary from a simple summary. The anatomy of a spider hole. To understand why the Marines mocked Jackson's slow-firing rifle, you have to understand the speed of the enemy. The Japanese spider hole was a masterpiece of concealment. A sniper would crouch in a vertical tube covered by a lid of woven grass and coral. He would lift the lid, fire a single shot, and drop back down, pulling the lid shut in less than 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, an M1 Garand user might get off 3 shots, but they would be reflexive shots, likely hitting the dirt or the lid. Jackson, with his Winchester, didn't aim for the man, he aimed for the mechanism of the hole. He learned to track the slight puff of dust that occurred when the lid was lifted. By the time the sniper's eye reached the sight, Jackson's .30-06 round was already in the air. He was beating the Japanese at a game of high-stakes whack-a-mole, where the loser never got a second chance. Ballistics in the tropics, the 115-degree factor. Any marksman will tell you that the environment is as much a factor as the rifle. On Peleliu, the humidity was often 90% and the temperature was 115 degrees. In these conditions, air is thinner, but the moisture adds a layer of drag that is difficult to calculate. Jackson's Winchester Model 70 was fitted with a Lyman Alaskan 2.5x scope, a piece of glass that many Marines considered too fragile for combat. However, Jackson understood the minute of angle, or MOA. He knew that at 200 yards in the steaming heat of the emerbrigul, his bullet would rise slightly before dropping. While his comrades were aiming center mass and missing because of the heat shimmer, mirage, Jackson was using holding under, using the precision of his mail-order rifle to compensate for the very atmosphere of the Pacific. The match-grade trigger, a dangerous advantage. One of the main reasons the military didn't issue Winchester 70s to everyone was the trigger. It was a hair trigger, adjustable down to a few pounds of pressure. In the hands of a panicked recruit, this was a recipe for accidental discharge. For Jackson, it was his greatest asset. A standard military M1 Garand has a creepy trigger. You have to pull it through a long, mushy distance before the hammer falls. In that split second of pulling, the rifle barrel moves. Jackson's Winchester had a glass rod break. The moment he decided to fire, the rifle fired. This lack of trigger creep is what allowed him to hit snipers who were only visible for a fraction of a second. The Ghost of the 11th Sniper, A Night in the Caves. After his 4-day streak, Jackson wasn't hailed as a hero immediately. He was viewed with a sort of eerie detachment. On the 5th night, he was forced to take cover in a small cave during a Japanese mortar barrage. He was alone with his rifle. He later recounted that he felt the presence of the men he had killed. This is the part the propaganda posters leave out. Jackson wasn't a sociopath. He was a hunter who respected his prey. He knew the Japanese snipers were just as skilled, just as thirsty, and just as terrified as he was. He spent that night cleaning his Winchester by touch in the dark, an intimate ritual between a man and the tool that had both saved his life and taken so many others.
The Medal of Honor Ceremony, White House, 1945. On October 5, 1945, the mockery officially ended forever. In a ceremony on the White House lawn, President Harry Truman awarded Arthur Jackson the Medal of Honor. Truman famously told the recipients he'd rather have the medal than his own office. Jackson stood there, a young man who had seen the worst of the human condition, being celebrated for his efficiency with a mail-order rifle. But as the cameras flashed, Jackson's mind was likely back on the ridges of Peleliu. He never bragged about the 11 snipers. To him, they weren't trophies, they were obstacles he had cleared so his friends could go home. The Pre-64 Winchester, a collector's holy grail. Because of Arthur Jackson, the Pre-64 Winchester Model 70 became a legend in both military and civilian circles. It earned the nickname the Rifleman's Rifle. Gun collectors today paid tens of thousands of dollars for specimens from that era, not just for their craftsmanship, but because of the pedigree established on islands like Peleliu. Jackson proved that a sporting weapon could survive the salt air, the coral dust, and the blood of the Pacific. He silenced the critics who believed that only a rugged, mass-produced military weapon could win a war. Sometimes, he proved, a scalpel is more effective than a bayonet. The evolution of the Scout Sniper. The Marine Corps' Scout Sniper program owes its modern philosophy to men like Art Jackson. Before 1944, sniping was an as-needed secondary skill. After Jackson, the Corps realized that one man with a high-precision bolt-action rifle could provide force multiplication that outweighed an entire company of standard infantry. Jackson's 4-day run at Peleliu. Living with the legend, Jackson's post-war life. Arthur Jackson lived a long life, passing away in 2017 at the age of 92. He remained humble until the end. He often said that the real heroes were the ones who didn't come off the ridges. He worked for the mail service, a poetic irony given the mail-order nickname of his rifle, and later served in the Army Reserve. He never sought the spotlight. He didn't write a tell-all book about his 11 kills. He understood that the rifle was a tool for a specific time and a specific place. But whenever a young Marine asked him about that Winchester, a glint would return to his eyes. He knew that for 4 days in 1944, he and that toy were the only thing standing between his squad in a shallow grave. Why the Japanese couldn't adapt? They were masters of the terrain, but they were hampered by their own rigid doctrine. The Japanese sniper was taught to stay in his hole until he died. They were static defenders. Jackson, using his hunting background, was a dynamic predator. He used the Winchester's light weight to constantly relocate. The Japanese snipers were looking for a Marine, a man in a helmet moving in a line.
They weren't prepared for a hunter, a man who moved like an animal and struck from angles that made no tactical sense. Jackson's success was a triumph of American individualism over imperial Japanese fatalism. Conclusion: the silence of the ridges. They mocked his rifle. They called it a mail-order toy. They said it had no place in the real war. But Arthur Jackson didn't listen to the noise. He listened to the wind. He listened to the leaves, and he listened to the snick of a bolt that never failed him. 11 snipers in 4 days, 12 pillboxes in 1 afternoon. One man and a hunting rifle changed the course of a battle that many had forgotten was even being fought. Arthur Jackson and his Winchester remind us that in the chaos of war, it isn't the weapon that defines the soldier, it is the precision of the heart behind the trigger.